To the founder, the endowed, transcendent destroyer, the one gone beyond, the foe destroyer, the completely perfected, fully awakened being, perfect in knowledge and in good conduct, Sugata, knower of the world, supreme guide of human beings to be tamed, teacher of gods and human beings, to you, the completely and fully awakened one, the endowed, transcendent destroyer, the glorious conqueror, the subduer from the Shakya clan, I prostrate, make offerings, and go for refuge. Turn the page. On page 75, we'll continue with the second full verse there, and we'll go to the middle of page 76. Homage to the Supreme Buddha, homage to the Dharma refuge, homage to the great Sangha, to all three ever devout homage, to all worthy of respect, bowing with bodies as many as all realms, atoms, in all aspects, with supreme faith I pay homage. Do not commit any non-virtuous actions. Perform only perfect virtuous actions. Subdue your mind thoroughly. This is the teaching of the Buddha. A star, a visual aberration, a flame of a lamp, an illusion, a drop of dew or a bubble, a dream, a flash of lightning, a cloud. See conditioned things as such. Through these merits may sentient beings attain the rank of all-seeing, subdue the foe of faults, and be delivered from samsara's ocean, perturbed by the waves of aging, sickness, and death. And go forward to, it'll be either on 97 or 98 in your prayer book, the short mandala offering. It's at the bottom of the page. This is actually a really old prayer book. This is the one that has it on 87. I don't know if this, where this one came from. But anyway, it's okay. No, it doesn't matter so much. I know the page numbers, so no, I'm fine. So again, we're doing the short mandala offering. Again, this is a way of kind of creating some positive potential to receive the teachings. And so we're making this vast, pure offering, imagining the entire phenomenal world transformed into a beautiful paradise. It's sort of representative of our own future enlightenment and the enlightenment of all beings. So we're making that vast, pure offering with that verse. We'll then skip over and do the Idam Guru mantra that's on page 98, and then the Refuge and Bodhicitta prayer that follows from there, that we'll do once in English and twice in Tibetan. This ground, anointed with perfume, strewn with flowers, adorned with Mount Meru, 4 continents, the sun and the moon. I imagine this as a Buddha field and offer it. May all living beings enjoy this pure land. Idam Guru Ratna Mandala Kam Niryatayami. I go for refuge until I am enlightened to the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Supreme Assembly. By the merits I create through listening to the Dharma, may I become a Buddha in order to benefit all sentient beings. Sangye Chodang Soki Choknam La Jangchu Bardu Dakni Kyabsu Chi Daki Chunyan Gipe Sonam Gi Jola Penshir Sangye Drupar Shog Sangye Chodang Soki Choknam La Jangchu Bardu Dakni Kyabsu Chi Daki Chunyan Gipe Sonam Gi Drola Penshir Sangye Drupar Shog. Wonderful. You can set the prayer books aside. Let's do a short meditation before we begin today's class. So just find a meditation posture that works for you in terms of your own comfort. But the most important part of our posture is to make sure the back is somewhat straight, upright, the head upright as well. But then trying to release any tension that we have in the body so it doesn't become an obstacle to our meditation. So softening into the shoulders, the neck, that's an area where we hold a lot of tension. The lower back, the lower abdomen, sometimes we tighten those areas as well. But anywhere else where you see some tension, just bring your awareness there and try to release that. And then breathing naturally, begin to attend to the breath. We're going to use the breath as our meditation object. And if you already have a technique that you use with the breath, you can do that. If not, I generally suggest tuning into that sensation in the area of the nostrils where you feel the air coming in and out of the nose. That very subtle sensation is your meditation object. Just try to stay present with it through the inhalation, through the exhalation. No doubt the mind will wander, and when we see that that's happened, it's perfectly normal for that to occur. We'll get caught up in distractions, thoughts that come into our head, planning for the future, remembering something from the past, maybe even some worry or preoccupation we have currently, or we might even get distracted by sounds. Whatever has happened, then we simply let that go, make a conscious choice to stop following that and to go back to the breath. So even if you have to do that many times over the next few minutes, that's perfectly fine. I'll ring the chime and we'll do this in silence for a few minutes, and then I'll lead you in a short reflection to set a good motivation for being here today. So now let's set our motivation together. In these last few classes, we've been examining Lama Zopa's advice about how to live the life of a bodhisattva, a being who is intent upon benefiting all sentient beings by becoming a Buddha oneself. So the bodhisattva engages in these very courageous acts, is willing to endure whatever it takes to be of service and benefit to others. So it's important that we train ourselves in those sorts of attitudes. So right now, just examine your own experience in terms of your daily life and the ways in which you are of service to others. Might be a service to your pets, to your children, to your parents, to your friends, your coworkers, your neighbors, your community. And just spend a moment kind of reflecting on that. It's important that we do acknowledge that we already do have some of these behaviors. We already do use our time, our resources to benefit others, attending to them as best as we currently can. So just pause for a minute or so to reflect on the ways in which you are already engaging in that sort of behavior. And even generate some joy thinking about that. Not to be, kind of become prideful, but rather to encourage us to continue to think that way, to engage in that sort of behavior. So then when we talk about bodhicitta, which is the mind of that bodhisattva, it's simply a mind that has gone beyond those ordinary ways in which we are helping others, benefiting them, to hold those thoughts of wanting to benefit all sentient beings, wanting to become wish-fulfilling for them. These verses that we've been looking at in the past few classes have helped us to generate those sorts of thoughts. What would it look like if we were able to take the seeds of what we currently experience, our own compassion, our love, our care and concern for others, and develop it to that degree? Develop it to the point where we are willing to do whatever it takes to benefit others, to be of service to them, to help them to have happiness, to not suffer. What does it look to enlarge that mind? Kind of seeing it initially as perhaps a bit of an ember in our heart that becomes a huge flame, kind of goes out and pervades all of space, all beings as the object of that mind. What's it like to grow that mind of bodhicitta from the seeds of compassion and love that you already possess, that you already demonstrate in your daily life? And just spend a minute or so thinking about that and kind of trying to grow that sincere wish to benefit others to the greatest degree. And then from the space of that very vast mind, add in the intention of becoming a Buddha then in order to accomplish that. That's the second aim of bodhicitta. The first is to enact the welfare of others, but the second one is necessary because we see we cannot do that in our current state. While we can continue to develop our minds and continue to be of greater and greater benefit to others, in order to be of the perfect benefit to others, we have to become enlightened. We have to become a Buddha. So hold that strong thought as well. These combined thoughts are the nature of bodhicitta. The sincere wish to benefit all beings by becoming enlightened ourselves. And think that you're using the time here today to help you on that path, to help you to eventually achieve that result. and therefore for all sentient beings to also attain that same result through your own guidance, your own influence upon them in that state of enlightenment. Okay, so again, we're continuing. We're getting towards the end of this. This is what we'll be concluding this next Sunday. This little text that Lama Zopa Rinpoche put together. Everyone should have a copy on your table. And once more, if you're new today and just coming for the first time, you can take this with you. This is a little practice that you can take home and use every day. We've been going through the first part of this that has to do with the initial thoughts that help us to make the most of this life. And so Lama Zopa Rinpoche encourages us at the beginning of each day to have this sort of reflection. And beginning on page 7, there's not a page number on page 7, it's the method to transform a suffering life into happiness, including enlightenment, starts with this direct meditation on the stages of the path. So I won't go through all of these things again, but that continues through essentially the top of page 10. And it just goes through, again, the initial teachings that help us to take everything that the Buddha taught and make it valid practice for ourselves. How we go about cultivating our minds all the way to the state of enlightenment. So all of these teachings that are on pages 7 through the top of page 10 are to help us to kind of align ourselves with the Buddha's teachings, review them in a sense so that we can become more aware of them in our own lives. Then we go on to the bottom of page 10. This was the section that we began that really is about, as it says there, how to live your life for sentient beings. How to actually be enacting this motivation of bodhicitta in your everyday life. And so we see that those first 2 verses on the bottom of page 10 are all about seeing sentient beings as very dear, that they're wish fulfilling for us because they help us in so many ways and eventually will help us to become enlightened by being the support for all of that. And then how we want to become wish granting, wish fulfilling for them. And then the last few classes we went through these wonderful verses from Shantideva's text. Shantideva, the great 8th century Indian Buddhist master who wrote the Bodhisattva's Way of Life. This is, again, some verses that help us to have these thoughts of even if we have to endure suffering or difficulty, whatever the case might be, we will keep sentient beings at the forefront of our motivation, wanting what we have to be a benefit to them, not being concerned if they criticize us, do things that harm us, because we want to be sure that we are doing whatever we can to benefit them. Again, we don't want other beings to engage in harmful actions, but if we're on the receiving end of that, we don't want to go to the normal places of anger, difficulty, all of that we create with other beings on the basis of the actions they do towards us. So then we got into this whole section where we looked at the idea of generating these really vast thoughts. This starts on page 13, where we have kind of a training in this bodhisattva attitude of wanting to do whatever it takes to help others. May I be a savior for those who lack a savior, a guide for all the beings who enter a road or a path, a boat, a ship, and a bridge for those who want to cross over water. I mean, these are outrageous types of things to try to become or to think that we could become. Now, when you become a Buddha, it said that you can manifest in those ways and help sentient beings in whatever way is in line with their karma. But this, as a kind of bodhisattva in training, we're just trying to enlarge our minds, think really big. His Holiness emphasizes this a lot, as well as Lama Zopa. We think big, because this is what we're aspiring to, is to open up our minds and our hearts to that, great degree. So again, this is what I was trying to encourage you to do in the meditation even today, was kind of what's it like to feel the heart get bigger and bigger and to encompass all beings. These are the sorts of things that help us to do that. So this continued until we got to the top of page 14, which is where we ended last time with this wonderful verse from Master Shantideva. We'll be reciting that verse at the end of today's class. It's part of our dedication prayers. But this verse encapsulates this bodhisattva attitude that we will be here and deal with whatever needs to be done, do whatever it takes, as long as there are suffering sentient beings. Now, of course, as a Buddha, that is your mission, in the sense, is to enlighten all sentient beings. And a Buddha doesn't ever run out of the energy to do that. It doesn't even require any effort or energy to do that. It's a spontaneous enacting of the welfare of others once we attain that state. But as a bodhisattva, we make these strong prayers that even if we have to hold ourselves back from enlightenment in order to get all beings to that state first, we would willingly do that. And recall how that's like the shepherd-like bodhicitta, where we have that courage to be able to say, I'm concerned more about all of your welfare than I am about my own. Now, I know when we initially, that's why we've been doing these verses that train us in that. When we initially hear those thoughts, the ego doesn't like to hear that, right? Because the ego is used to the opposite. I'll take care of myself first, and then I'll take care of all of you. And there is some logic to that. And again, in our daily life, we do need to tend to ourselves in order to care for others. But the bodhisattva attitude is always to put others first, always to think of others first. And this is how we actually become enlightened even more quickly, is through that type of attitude. So again, we went through this little bit on page 14 in italics after this, how Gampopa, Milarepa's heart disciple, said, after waking from sleep and before you get out of bed, think, today I'm going to use my body, speech, and mind. These are what we call our three doors, the three doors through which we engage in action and karma, in virtue for sentient beings. We're going to do everything we can to use them virtuously. It is so important, Lama Zopa says, to generate this precious thought of bodhicitta, the ultimate good heart. Whatever you do that day is then done with bodhicitta. So everything then becomes virtue and the cause of enlightenment. If your motivation is wrong, everything then becomes negative karma and a cause of the evil gone realms, take us into states that won't be so useful for us or for others. Then, when you go to sleep at night, dedicate all your actions of body, speech, and mind for sentient beings. This is also extremely important. And then without difficulties, this becomes the path to the Dharmakaya, to the state of Buddhahood that we're all trying to attain. So this is really precious advice, this whole first part about kind of the thoughts that should inform our daily living. And we even went into the little practices of bodhicitta mindfulness that Lama Zopa talks about that are in the book Bodhisattva Attitude, the free book that's in the cabinet out there. And so we can bring bodhicitta into anything that we do. We can have bodhicitta motivation to drive our car, bodhicitta motivation to sit down in a chair, bodhicitta motivation to, take a bath, bodhicitta motivation to eat our food, whatever the case might be. If we try to keep that motivation alive, it gets stronger and stronger and stronger. So this is, again, the way that we are actually able to change our minds over time. And then, as it says, without difficulties, we will, achieve that final state. So what we're going to look at today, and in next week's class, we'll see how far I get if I don't finish this whole remainder of this text, which really isn't too much left to it. It's mostly mantra recitations and things after blessing the speech. But the idea is, if I finish this, or even if I finish it towards the beginning of next class, we'll do the whole practice together next week on Sunday. I think it'd be nice just to go through it all one time together. So hopefully I'll be able to complete most of this today. What we have in the remainder of this text, starting from page 15, are the additional practices that Lama Zopa feels are really important that we also do. And I'll talk about them from that standpoint of what we just were conversing about, bodhicitta motivation. If we really have bodhicitta motivation at a deep level, if we really want to benefit others, then we should be so happy, so delighted to engage in these practices that through the kindness of the Buddha and Lama Zopa and other people who've helped to put this all together, we have the opportunity to do. Because these are practices that will help us to attain enlightenment even more quickly. These are practices that will help us to generate great virtue, great merit. Especially this first one, which is called blessing the speech, according to the instructions of the great yogi Kungpo. Lama Zopa found this practice, and he's been pushing this practice quite a few years. I'm going to show some videos as part of today. This is, again, I was hoping to show more videos of Rinpoche teaching. I've got a few clips that I've pulled from the course in this that the FPMT has on this practice. But the videos go back to 2009, over 10 years ago, the very first Light of the Path retreat in North Carolina. And I was there for that and the one subsequent, and Rinpoche's been kind of working with this practice and introducing it gradually to students, and now it's in this wonderful little booklet that we all can practice from. So if we really think about it, how is it that we connect most with sentient beings? It's through our speech. We might shake somebody's hand or give them a hug or something, but through our bodies, we don't do so, where our bodies are present, obviously, but we don't do so much through our bodies to interact with others. It's through our speech that we're interacting with others. And as much as we try to work on our speech and to try to curtail non-virtuous speech, we still engage in it. We still will have times where we say things that we regret and, um, say things that are not so helpful, beneficial to others. So it's really important that we engage in this practice because we can make our speech even more powerful and become a source of virtue throughout our day. So we're going to look at the benefits of all of this as part of what Lama Zopa presents. But this is what we're going to focus on in the beginning of today, is to engage in this very practice that he's put forward, blessing the speech according to these instructions. The one thing I will mention here is that in his commentary, he actually says that if possible, you should do this blessing of the speech even prior to reciting everything else that we already talked about. And why that is because you want your speech to be as powerful as possible. If you bless your speech before doing that prayer that we just went through, then when you recite it, it will have even greater power. We're getting into this area, and I know today might be a little hard, and even next week for some of you who may not have as much conviction in some of these things as what others might. We are getting into the realm of mantra and various practices that do have a bit more of an esoteric nature to them. Somebody up in Taos, one of the students up there, describes them as woo-woo practices, or woo-woo teachings. There's a little woo-woo going on in this because we are talking about mantras that are said to have these amazing powers. And it does take some faith. And Rinpoche even talks about that in his commentary in terms of faith being an important part of it. But faith in Buddhism, again, is never blind faith. We have to have some faith in the Buddha as a guide based on the teachings that he gives that we practice ourselves and come to see as valid. And of course, that's the Buddha's whole approach, right? The Buddha never says, here's my teachings, now practice them because I said so. The Buddha says, here's my teachings. You take them and treat them as a goldsmith would treat gold ore before actually purchasing it. They'd want to burn it and cut it and, shape it, do all the various things to it to see if it actually behaves as gold. And then they'll happily buy it. It's the same with the teachings. If we don't take the time to invest the Buddha's teachings, then our faith never really grows. Because faith in Buddhism is more about confidence, conviction that we develop over time, rather than a blind faith. Oh, the Buddha said it, it must be true. That's maybe the beginning steps, is some admiration of the Buddha when we come to these teachings. But the Buddha doesn't need our admiration, and the teachings themselves are only meant to be applied in our own lives. So if we don't apply them in our own lives and see their validity for ourselves, we're not really doing that additional work that is part of the Buddhist path. So with that in mind, we're going to be examining, again, how to approach this. But the very first thing, as I said, that Rinpoche goes into, is that we should do this the first thing in the morning, even before you begin to speak. He says, even while you're still in bed. I know it gets to be hard to do this entire practice in bed before you get up. You might have to go to the bathroom first before you can do anything, or have a cup of coffee first before you can do anything. If you live by yourself, maybe it's not so hard to do it without speaking, but if you can do the blessing and the speech before you get out of bed, it doesn't really take too long. It's not a very long practice, but there are a lot of elements to it that take a little while to get used to doing. So he says you can do this motivation that we just talked about, this method to transform a suffering life into happiness, the pages 7 through 14. You can do that ahead of time. But he says you should do that silently rather than saying it. But it's better to do it after, because then if you're saying it once more, because your speech has been blessed, you have greater power to it. So we have on the practice, again, we look at this, begins with taking refuge in generating bodhicitta. This is a very short 2-line prayer to be able to do that. And then you go into a visualization, the visualization of arising in the form of a tantric deity. Now, again, this is where we get into a little discussion, because not everyone in the room has tantric empowerment. And that's understandable, and it's perfectly fine. If you're feeling like you're not ready for Tantra, and we don't have tantric empowerments every day here in Thupten Norbuling, we have them very rarely when these visiting lamas come through and we have the opportunity to offer them. If you don't have a tantric empowerment, that's perfectly fine. Don't worry about that element of it. On the other hand, it is said that you can think of yourself in the form of Buddha Shakyamuni. This is the one Buddha that you are allowed to sort of see yourself in the form as. Of course, the tanka that's right behind me, the golden Buddha in the center, as well as the statue, that's the sort of way that you would want to see yourself. But you don't just kind of think, oh, I'm the Buddha. You do still want to go through a similar tantric process which, as it says here, in the very first line, it says, purify the truly existent I in emptiness. So this is a huge teaching. This is what we're talking about on Wednesday night. But what it essentially means is that we are clinging to this strong sense of a self, a person. You know, we talked about this earlier, even in the Sunday class when we were going through the trainings in wisdom and so on. But what we're clinging to this false sense of self. We have to counteract that. So we have to think about the emptiness of that self, that self doesn't exist in the way that it appears. Again, these are very involved teachings that essentially when the easiest way to present it perhaps is to look at the way that the self does exist. In the end, the Buddha says that the self, the I, is really just a label that we are putting on this collection of things. Our body and speech and mind, whatever, all of this that is this basis for a self. The I is a thought towards that, kind of on that. But there is no real I on this collection of stuff. And if we go looking for it, we don't find that real I in that way. So the I does exist. You do exist, but you exist in a very nominal way. Just a thought or reference to this collection of stuff as being I. There's no I beyond that, nothing more than that. So when we go into this space of dissolving the I into emptiness, we think about negating anything more than that, any concreteness to the I, any substantial existence to the I, anything that is more than that. Kind of dissolve that by virtue of understanding that it doesn't exist. Now, again, if you've engaged in a lot of study in this, you might even do a little reflection on some of the techniques to analyze and what have you. But at least to have that thought that what I am adhering to so strongly, that is the driving force behind all my crazy states of mind. We talked about this yesterday in Discovering Buddhism. All of our delusions are driven by this ignorance that holds to this sense of I. If we just dissolve that so that there's this kind of open space of not clinging to that at all, this negation of that, then you arise in the form of the Buddha if you don't have an initiation, or in the form of your own tantric deity if you are practicing a particular deity. Some of you might do Vajrayogini practice, some of you might do Kala Chakra practice, whatever your practice is, you arise in that form. So again, in order to arise in the form of that deity, you do have to have the empowerment. Even Medicine Buddha, Rinpoche says there's no permission to do the arisal in the form of Medicine Buddha without the empowerment. Now, again, people ask me, well, what if I do it? You know, what's the big deal? You know, it's just not so powerful because, again, an empowerment, a tantric initiation is a mutual meditation between the master and the students who are present, the disciples who are there engaging in that. And there is a transmission of that practice in doing that. It is again, not that tangible, but it is something that occurs by virtue of that particular ceremony that you engage in. So if you haven't received that kind of energy from the Lama, who's well-versed in that practice and who, you know, has the seeds of all of that himself or herself, well, then you're not going to get it. You're not going to get much by doing a visualization of yourself in the form of these deities. So it's okay to do it as the Buddha, but not to do it again as green tar or any of these other beings without empowerment. Yeah, Mary.
Rinpoche was here and he gave the full Medicine Buddha initiation. So a lot
Yeah.
of people have Medicine Buddha here, and also His Holiness Dr. Chuchen did give, you know, I think it was just
A Sakya
Kriya,
empowerment, yeah.
Kriya, and then people have received Vajrasattva here. So I mean, you guys have.
Some people have. Again, there are 4 levels of Tantra. The 2 main ones that there are empowerments in on a usual basis are Kriya or Action Tantra and Highest Yoga Tantra. So again, there was the opportunity just a few years ago with Lama Zopa to do the Medicine Buddha empowerment. If you came to that whole weekend, the 2-day thing that was Saturday and Sunday, then you engaged in the practice, you know, and did everything as part of the instructions as best as you could, then you have received that empowerment. You can see yourself in the form of the Medicine Buddha. Is that clear to everyone? I'm just making, you know, this Rinpoche always wants to advise people in this way to be sure that you're not sort of engaging in practices beyond where you're at. And it's good to, you know, if you have a desire to do that, then to seek out those empowerments. We'll try to offer them here when we can, when visiting lamas come through, but it's hard. You know, there's only so many traveling around and they go to a lot of other places, but you can keep an eye on other FPMT centers where many of these lamas go, and you can travel there and do the empowerments as well. So.
But the good news, like you said, is we can can visualize ourselves as Shakyamuni Buddha.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
wow, here we go.
Yeah.
You know.
And this is one thing that even in the prayer books, there's a practice. We do this as part of Module 8, which is coming up in Discovering Buddhism. We'll do that in March and April. There's a practice where you are allowed and encouraged to visualize yourself as the Buddha. It's an entire daily practice that kind of follows from some of these same sorts of trainings and things. But so this is the very first part. Purify the truly existent I in emptiness. Then your wisdom realizing emptiness, which is non-dual with great bliss, manifests as a deity. This is a particular way of talking about it in highest Yoga Tantra, but it's this idea that we want to generate this very blissful thought together with that wisdom that arises in the form of this being, this pure being that we're visualizing ourselves as either Shakyamuni Buddha or whatever deity we're working with. Let me explain just a little bit about deity yoga and why it's so important. And people may wonder, well, what am I doing by this? The tantric path, and particularly this practice we call deity yoga, is said to be a very quick path to attaining enlightenment because it's working with, it's called the resultant vehicle rather than the causal vehicle. Most of what we deal with in our teachings here is causal, meaning that we are talking about creating all these causes and conditions, and Buddhahood is seen as something out there in the future, and we're working our way to achieving that. In Tantra, you're taking that result and you're bringing it into the present. And you're holding yourself to be an enlightened being right now. Because you have the seeds of enlightenment within you, have Buddha nature within you. All beings have Buddha nature. And so you're kind of using that as a basis to be able to see yourself as a purified being right now. Now, obviously, we aren't a purified being right now, but it's the idea of kind of being in that space of enacting that. And it's a very powerful technique, therefore, to creating the causes for that to come even more quickly. And there are other practices that you engage in highest Yoga Tantra in particular, that we can't get into. It's very extensive and also not something that's that openly shared about how to actually enact that transformation. But it involves tapping into subtle energies in the body. This human body that we have has an amazing resource within it that we're quite blind to most of the time because we're at a much coarser, grosser level. I mean, most of you have had some experience with acupuncture or even doing yoga and working with prana in the body. In Chinese medicine, it's qi, right? You know, this is the same kind of concept in Tibetan Buddhism. We're working with the wind energies in the body and manipulating them to get to subtler levels of awareness and affect transformations in a much quicker way. That's the essence of what we're talking about in terms of highest Yoga Tantra. I know David Kamito has been going through on some Saturday afternoons in the past and approached with the Madhyamika teachings within Vajrayana tantric teachings and so on. But that's the essence of what we mean by the tantric practices. But it always is together with the wisdom realizing emptiness. Otherwise, it becomes kind of pointless. You're trying to take that wisdom that you're trying to cultivate and further and unite it with this very powerful method, the tantric method for actualizing enlightenment even more quickly than the sutra path, the more common path that does look at things in a much more causal way versus this resultant approach. That's the essence of what we mean by highest Yoga Tantra and deity yoga. So in highest Yoga Tantra, you're ideally supposed to be seeing yourself as an enlightened being all the time, and the world around you as an enlightened world, a realm, a mandala of that particular being, and every being that you see as completely purified and so on. It's a pretty profound practice, very hard one to engage in. But it does involve a lot of visualization. This little practice that we're going to engage in does involve some visualizations, which are kind of useful to get us into that realm of kind of working with these ideas. So any questions on that in terms of when we say there, I clarify myself as the deity, the instructions again are to think about dissolving that concrete sense of I within the sphere of emptiness, recognizing it doesn't exist in that way. Then from that wisdom manifesting in the form of either the Buddha, if you don't have empowerment, or the deity that you've been empowered into, initiated into. Okay. So that's the very first line. Hopefully we'll move a little faster than that. On my tongue, this is kind of an interesting one. Well, actually, let's go to Rinpoche. I think this is where I do have a clip of Rinpoche. One thing I need to make sure that I'm doing is that I'm got, I think, Rick, is it shift and the P, or is it the Microsoft thing in P? Which is the one that makes sure I can share my screen? There it is. Okay. Okay, let's see if it works. Rinpoche's on screen? Wonderful. Okay. Is that the one? Let's see.
This just about one time to time we received the perfect human body that was extremely rare to find to be found to receive. And then I met up with a friend living in Patsy, living in Patsy, extremely rare to extremely rare to find, we have found, and I met with Lama that was extremely rare to meet. We have met this time, and well, at this time we have all the opportunities. As says, we have all the opportunities to practice Dharma. But when we enter the Yambudima Samane Soha.
I'm sorry?
Are there closed captions?
No, there are no captions to this. No. I'm sorry, I was supposed to start a little bit later. I got my little card here with all my video clips for today. So this is where we start, and we hear Rinpoche giving the actual instruction on the technique for doing that.
So yourself, so out of emptiness, then this rush into some deity, your own deity, you see, that you have common connection with them. That and you have so then I see first purify emptiness, and then you see then wisdom understanding this manifest into deity. Of course, they don't have received initiation for that. So that once in punk in the silver then I can't transform for that then the color of the white, the white arm, and then around so this so here so this tongue the tongue and the transform disc, okay, and in the center white arm, then a couple white consonants starts right in the front of the arm, you see, then from there clockwise, then I see the om a e u ri li li e o nga swas so then you see clockwise, then the kalima or the red curries consonants, you see, then see vowel starts to like this, then right in front of that then there's another you see, consonants starts. Then left side is om ka za za nya da 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 ba 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 ma ya la wa sha sa ju so ha so then again the blue, the heart depend rising mantra, then again it starts there's three ohms, one ohm here, one of the ohm, the ohm is then clockwise, yedama head, brabawa head, and the cantada gato, hewandada, they can say, yo, stop there, Nero, the Yambudima Samane Soha. There's no break in the Tibet line, but you have to break when you recite it, we say. What is it? Then if you recite yoni together, yoni rata, then it has totally different meanings.
Okay, so we'll pause there. Okay. Yeah. So let's go through what Rinpoche was explaining again. He says, after you manifest as a deity, then you visualize that on your tongue is the letter ah, the syllable ah. It's at the bottom of the page there. This is what it looks like in the Tibetan. Again, it might be hard to visualize all these things in the Tibetan. I don't think there's a problem with visualizing them in the English if you can't. And that transforms into a moon. By a moon, they don't mean the full round moon that's up in the sky. They mean a moon disk. They always talk about it as a moon disk. It's a flat moon, circular moon, but it's flat. And then on that appears the white syllable Om. Om is a big syllable in Buddhism. It's because it kind of, and it even is in the Hindu tradition. They have a different way of spelling it. Obviously, they don't use the Tibetan letters, but Om kind of encapsulates kind of the essence of all the Buddhas. And that is white in the center of the moon disk. And then you have these three circular mantras, mantra garlands, you could call them. And they go out. One is close to the Om, then the next one around that, and then the next one around that. And the first one is white in color, and it's the Ali, which is on the next page at the bottom. The Ali are the Sanskrit vowels. And so these are, again, Om, A, E, U, Ri, Li, E, O, Ang, Swaha. So that's the mantra garland. So it'll go from, here you have the center Om. Rinpoche was saying the first Om, that's the beginning of this, the Ali, starts there, and it goes in a clockwise direction on your tongue, this white mantra garland of those letters. Again, this is a really intricate visualization, but do the best that you can. I mean, I'm not doing it at that level of getting every little letter, but just kind of have that visualization of a ring of letters that's white in color around the white Om. The next one going out are the Kali, the red consonants. And so they start with an Om as well. So that Om is in front of the Om of the Ali. So you have these, you have the Om in the center, the first Om, then the second Om, and that goes in a counterclockwise direction. He said to the left. So that is Om, ka ga nga, tsa za gyana, tata dadana, tata dadana, papa baba ma, yara lawa, shaka saha kya swaha. So again, the two that look the same are those two in the middle, right? That look like they're just exactly the same. Tata dadana, tata dadana. But actually in Tibetan as well as Sanskrit, you do have one that's got a bit more of an R sound to it. So that would be the first one. You say tata dadana, tata dadana. So there's just a little bit of like an R sound to that first one. That is going in the counterclockwise direction. So you have that red mantra garland. Then again, in line with the other Oms is your third Om going out, which is the beginning of the blue dependent relation heart mantra. And so that begins and goes in a clockwise direction, similar to the Ali. And it is Om Ye Dharma Hetu Prabhava Hetan Tekan Tatagato Hyavadai Tekan Zayo, and Rinpoche says to pause there, Nirodha Evam Badi Maha Shramanaye Swaha. Again, and we're going to talk about, Rinpoche even gives some advice in terms of the pronunciation. He says it's not an absolute that you have to pronounce everything, correctly, every single syllable. The bigger issue, once more, is your faith in all of this, and your conviction that these are, through the kindness of the Buddha, this process by which we can transform our speech and make our speech even more powerful. Okay, so this is the visualization. You've started off, on your tongue is this moon disk that the Ah melted into, and the Om rises in the center, and you have the three mantra garlands, So you got all that going on your tongue. Before you recite the mantras, you have this little instruction at the top of page 16, where it says light beams radiate from the syllable Om and the mantra garlands, hooking back the blessings and power of the speech of those gone beyond and those not beyond the world, in the form of the three mantras, the seven sublime precious objects of a king's reign, the 8 auspicious signs, and the 8 auspicious substances. It's getting even more complicated, right? But what you're doing here is Rinpoche says that the very first step is that you are going to send this out to collect the blessings of those who are beyond this world. Those who are beyond this world includes those who are beyond samsara. I mean, they're no longer under the control of their karma and delusions. So this would include Buddhas, obviously, bodhisattvas who have developed their mind to that degree, as well as what are called arhats, those who practice the Hinayana path, who have attained their own liberation from the afflictions. All the beings who are no longer caught up in samsara, their speech is completely purified. So you're sending out this energy, this wish to receive their blessings, this through the form of these light beams that go out from everything you visualize on your tongue to collect all of that from these beings who are purified in their speech completely. Then all of that comes back to you in the form of all these various symbols. Now, again, I think I had on the screen here before we started one little graphic of the 8 auspicious signs. Most of you know these. We have them hanging in the back there on that little blue banner there. The 8 auspicious signs, these are said to be they create the causes for good fortune. You have the precious parasol and the conch shell and the victory banner and the 2 fishes and the lotus and the wealth face and the dharma wheel and the endless knot. You can read more about them in books like this. I brought in the few this is a smaller book called Buddhist Symbols, and you can find out more about them and what they're all about. And there's a larger book that Robert Beer did called the Tibetan Symbols and Motifs, an encyclopedia of all of that that's really quite useful. So I'm not going to go into all that because I think it goes beyond what we need to talk about today. You also have what are called the 8 auspicious substances and the 7 royal objects. As it says there, it called them in this one, the 7 precious objects of a king's reign. These are the precious golden wheel, the precious wish-fulfilling jewel, the queen, the minister, the elephant, the horse, the general. There are said to be these what are called wheel-turning monarchs in this world. I don't know if one exists at this point, but if you create this amazing karma, you manifest as a wheel-turning king or monarch, and then you have this ability to have all these objects that are part of you're doing good for the world. It's a very auspicious thing to attain. So again, these help to create causes of good fortune as well, these 7 precious emblems of royalty. Then the 8 auspicious substances, I'm not so familiar with those. I had to look those up, but these are the right coiling conch shell, the yogurt, durva grass, vermilion, bilva fruit, myrrh, giwang, I don't know what a giwang is, white mustard seed. So again, you won't be able to do all of these, trust me. I mean, it's impossible to do all these visualizations and have them all be perfect. But just whatever works for you, the idea of you're going to send all that energy out to collect all the blessings of these holy beings, and it comes back into you in these auspicious forms that absorb into the mantra garlands at your tongue and the Om. Is there questions or? Yeah, Mary.
When I do this practice, I simplify it, so
Uh-huh.
I make sure my motivation is really, really, really strong, and then I hook in blessings, and I just keep it all about light.
Absolutely, yeah.
That way, because if I think about the objects, then I'll be lost.
Yeah.
I'll be designing them as they're coming in. So, I just keep it real simple and purify my body, speech, and mind there.
Again, I think it's perfectly fine to adapt these practices for our own mind. So again, those of you who are online may not have heard Mary's comment. She just said, just think about capturing the blessings and bringing them back in light or whatever, nectar, whatever works for you. This idea that you're going to kind of imbue that mantra garland on your tongue, those mantra garlands, with all the blessings of those beings. Once more, again, it's not as important to have everything down to the letter as it is to have the faith in the practice and the desire to do it as best as you can. I'll share some stories later from Rinpoche that give an idea of that. The second sort of wave, because he actually does break it into 2 parts, is first you've done those that are beyond the world, all those that I just mentioned. Then you do those that are not beyond the world yet. So there's still a lot of holy beings out there that haven't transcended samsara, but they've purified their speech. Even what it says here, it's in that little blocked off section on page 16. It says, those who are not beyond the world are yogis who are accomplishing the path and the sages who have actualized words of truth. Due to the power of abiding in silence and living in the morality of abstaining from negative karmas of speech, the words of these sages have much power, and so whatever they pray for is successful. So there are beings who've kind of purified their speech in a more mundane way. They haven't completely purified their speech, but by virtue of those sorts of practices, their speech is also very powerful. So again, and we're not stealing anything from these beings. That's not the intention. It's like, I'm going to take all their good speech and put it into my tongue or whatever. The idea is that it's there to share. That's the energy of this type of thing, because it's how they are sharing their speech in the world. It's how that speech exists. So we're kind of hooking all of those blessings, all the power of speech, as it says there, all their blessings and power of speech are hooked back in the form of all these various things. It does say also in the form of the 3 mantras. Maybe that's even easier to visualize, is that they come back in terms of these 3 rings, of the blue and the red and the white rings that are around the Om, and they absorb into that. So again, make this as simple as you wish, or you can make it as complicated as you wish. They absorb into the mantras on the moon disk on your tongue, and Rinpoche says like rain falling on the ocean. Or sometimes they use the idea of snow falling on a lake or something, so that, the snow just kind of becomes part of it. It just melts into it. It doesn't, stay on the surface. It just becomes part of that mantra garland. Okay, so that's the first part. After you've visualized it, you've sent out all of those hooks to grab all those blessings and put them into your tongue. Now you do the actual visualization and recitation of the mantra. And Rinpoche does say that he added these visualizations. These weren't part of the original practice, but they make a lot of sense in terms of, complementing the recitation of these. So when you recite the Ali, the vowels that we went through, and I'll recite them again. As you recite them, white nectar beams flow down from the mantra and fill your entire body. In this case, we're blessing the body and purifying our actions of the body. So all negative karmas collected with your body from beginningless rebirths are completely purified. And you're blessing the speech as part of this whole practice, but you can feel that you're also blessing your body and purifying it through this recitation of these vowels. So again, it's Om. And then the second one, you'll notice it's got a little, if you look at the Tibetan, it's got a little marker underneath it. That's like kind of, I don't know how to, you see that you first start with the Om, that's the very first one, then there's a dot, and then the next one is an Ah, but then the next one has an Ah that's got a little marker underneath it. And that's the same for the second one of all of these. That just extends the tone. So you have Om, Ah, Ah, E, U, Ri, Li, E, O, Ah, Swaha. So you extend it out. And it is important that you articulate these. I mean, Rinpoche was doing things rather quickly, but nonetheless, he says that Choden Rinpoche's advice is to say them very clearly, very, directly. So don't, slur them all and make them all into one big soup. It just everyone pronounced. And you'll learn these over time, become very easy to pronounce and to remember. And you do that visualization of all these white nectar beams flowing down through your body, purifying all your negativities of body. The main ones, of course, being killing or harming others, physically in that way, their bodies, stealing from them, taking anything that they did not offer to you freely. And then the third one, any sexual misconduct that we've engaged in, unwise sexual behavior with our bodies, where we have harmed others through the use of our sexuality, through adultery, through coerced sexual behavior, whatever the case might be. Okay. Or any other thing that we've done through our physical bodies, completely purified. Then you go on to the Kali. So this was that first ring, mantra garland around the Om. You go to the next one, and you can even visualize. I mean, I find it sometimes helpful to, like, as I'm going Om, to actually go through kind of a ring of those, of kind of not seeing all of them exactly as they appear in the Tibetan, but having that kind of idea that you're touching on them and kind of activating that ring from which all of this white nectar descends down. Then we go to the red mantra garland, which is the Kali. And as you recite the consonants, red nectar beams flow down from the mantra and fill your whole body. And here we're specifically purifying our negative karma collected with our speech from beginningless rebirths. Again, the 4 main ways that we engage in unwise behavior with our speech, non-virtuous behavior, is through lying, through dividing people with our speech, saying things that cause people to have disharmony, to not, get along with each other, through saying things that are harsh to others, that are intended to have a harsh tone, not when we say something harsh that is out of a compassionate motivation, like a truck's coming, to get somebody out of the road or something. That might sound very harsh, but it's got a compassionate motivation. Anytime that we use cutting words, rude words, things that were harmful in that capacity. And then finally, the one that we engage in most frequently, but that we, is not very strong in and of itself, is our idle talk, our meaningless chatter, all the things that we rabbit on about, as Venerable Rabina says, that don't really amount to much and are generally a source of great attachment for us. We love to just sit and talk for hours and hours about things that don't mean anything. That's a weaker one of those four, but we engage in it probably much more frequently than the others. Any other ways that we've harmed others through speech, it's purified by reciting the mantra and doing the visualization. And again, it goes Om Kaka Gaga Nga Tsa Tsa Za Gya Na Ta Ta Da Da. Oh, and this is the one that's a little more Ta Ta Da Da Na. It's got a little more of, again, a kind of an R to it. You kind of bring the tongue back a little. Ta Ta Da Da Na Papa Ba Ba Ma Yara Lawa Shaka Saha Kya Swaha. Again, in Tibetan, you have a similar schema. They do have vowel sounds and they have the consonant sounds. And, there's a default for the vowels and all of that. And it's kind of interesting in Tibetan language. But these consonants, again, have that power to purify our speech in particular. So you do that 3 times with that visualization of all the red nectar. Then you go on to the heart mantra of dependent relation. As you recite this is the outermost one, and it's clockwise. You visualize that from that blue mantra garland, blue nectar beams flow down from the mantra, fill your whole body. All negative karmas collected with your mind from beginningless rebirths are completely purified. So here we worked with the 3 doors then. The first would be the door of the body through the Ali, the white mantra garland. The second is the door of our speech through the Kali, the red mantra garland. And the third is the door of our minds, all of our mental action, that it needs to be purified through the force of the dependent related heart mantra, that is the blue mantra garland. So as you recite it, that all fills your body. Let's go through how that is pronounced again. Om Ye Dharma Hetu Prabhava Hetan Tekan Tatagato Hyavadai Tekan Sayo. Again, pause there. Niroda Evambadi Maha Shramanaye Swaha. Why you pause again is because Rinpoche says if you blend them together, it takes a different meaning. The yo connecting with the ni of Niroda creates a different meaning, and it's not proper to recite it that way. It doesn't. He says it's not in the instruction, but he's learned this from other masters he's had, that you do need to pause there. Any questions up to this point before we take a break? When we come back, we'll do the absorption of the mantras. Too complicated? What I would encourage you to do is just, work with it in a real simple way at the beginning. Don't get too much into like a judging of whether you're doing it right or wrong. Just do it as best as you can, given the instructions and what we're going through here, and just see how it works for you. And over time, it becomes like anything. You become more familiar with it. It becomes easier to do, and so on. So, all right. So let's take. Okay, good. So I thought before we go into the absorption, I'll show a video of Rinpoche talking again, just a short one. That'll be about 8 minutes or so of him talking about the absorption and then the dedication part of that practice. But I thought at this point it might be useful to share what Rinpoche shares at the very end of his commentary on this, where he talks about how the power of mantras comes from faith, as I've been mentioning earlier. He says the benefits of reciting mantras are not dependent on correct pronunciation. They come from faith. It is good to pronounce mantras as correctly as you can. Having said that, it's not that, we just, again, slur them all and make them into something else. But nonetheless, there's these wonderful stories that exhibit how it all depends upon faith. And there's even stories about holy objects as well that do the same thing. His Holiness Dzong Rinpoche's previous incarnation, Rinpoche says, told a story about this during one of the Dharma celebrations. A monk went to see a Lama and asked him for teachings. The Lama, who was very busy and didn't have much time, said to the monk, "Your nose is like Rudraksha." Rudraksha, maybe you've seen the little beads that are Rudraksha. They have like little bumps on them and stuff. Apparently the man's face, who came to the Lama for advice, the monk, had pockmarked face and on his nose or whatever, these different marks. So he said, "Your nose looks like Rudraksha." This is what the Lama said to him. And the monk must have, thought that what he said to him was the mantra that he received then. You know, the monk who didn't understand what the Lama said thought that that he had received a mantra and faithfully recited it every day. Your nose is like Rudraksha. Your nose is like Rudraksha. Your nose is like Rudraksha. Eventually, he became able to heal many people by reciting this mantra. Some years, now the wonderful ending to it is coming up. Some years later, when the Lama had an infection in his throat, his attendant told him that there was a very famous healer in the area, one who had helped many people, and the Lama agreed to see him. When the monk came to see the Lama, he recited, "Your nose is like Rudraksha." Remembering what he had said in the past, the Lama laughed so much that the infection burst and the pus came out, due to which he got better. So again, the fact that he became this great healer through the force of this faith, and what he received, which was just an insult, really, from the Lama, you know, your nose looks like Rudraksha. He turned it into a very powerful mantra through his great faith. The one that has to do with holy objects is the dog's tooth story. Many of you have heard this before, right? There's a mother whose son keeps going, she lives in Nepal or something, and her son keeps going on pilgrimage to India. And every time that he goes, she says, "I want you to bring me back a relic of the Buddha." And he always forgets. And so he comes back, and then the one time he decides to go, she tells him, ultimatum. She says, you either bring me back a relic of the Buddha or don't bother coming back. So he's on his way home from India, and he realizes that he didn't get a relic for her again. And so he sees a dead dog on the side of the road, and he says, "Oh, I'll just take one of the teeth." And he has a piece of silk, and he wraps it up in there and makes it all very nice. And he goes home and offers this to his mother. And his mother ends up, she's so happy that her son has given her this relic of the Buddha and puts it on her shrine. And, you know, she pays all this homage to it. And she gains all these incredible realizations on the basis of it. And it's just a dog's tooth, right? But she has this faith from her side that makes it into something very powerful. Of course, I'm sure the son accumulated a lot of negative karma, but maybe not. I mean, he gave her something that helped her to increase her own faith. But yeah. So I mean, where does the power of holy objects come from? Where does the power of mantra come from? And we can say yes. I mean, these mantras are from the Buddha. The Buddha uttered these, or various beings, you know, holy beings uttered these, and they've given them some power by virtue of their realizations. But it's not a one-sided thing. Everything is interdependent. Our ability to receive the blessings of all that also is greatly contingent upon our own minds. As I said, we use the word faith. That's just because it's in English, it's what's meant. But faith, obviously, in Buddhism is not identical to faith in other traditions. It's really much more about checking up, you know, looking at things with a critical eye and coming to understand that the Buddha is a reliable guide. Well, then, if he's a reliable guide on the basis of these teachings that he's given us, then these other things that he offers, which might be a little more esoteric and hard to get our heads around, are also valid. Because we have that confidence in the Buddha as a spiritual teacher and the teachings that he's given as appropriate medicine. So Rinpoche says, if there is no faith, there won't be much result. Although, of course, reciting mantras does leave a positive imprint on the mind. That's because of the power of those mantras that came from the Buddha. So there is something from the side of the Buddha that initiated that speech that will leave an imprint on the mind, that will in the future, he says, cause one to learn Dharma, to actualize the path, to cease the gross and subtle defilements, and eventually achieve full enlightenment. This is because all mantras have the long-term effect of bringing one to enlightenment. The word mantra itself literally means mind protection. And this is what the Buddha has, through his kindness, given us, is these utterances that help us to protect our own minds. This is why we're encouraged, even, you know, if you do have like a cat or a dog that's on your bed sleeping with you and you wake up in the morning and you're starting this practice, it's good to recite those things out loud then so your animals hear that, because it plants the seeds in their mental continuum by having heard those words. So there's some power from the side of the mantra. We're not denying that, but the main power is our own faith in these practices and our decision to, you know, engage in them out of that. So anyway, any comments on that idea? I just thought it might be useful to share it here because we will be getting into these additional daily mantras. Yeah. It means mind protection. I mean, I find like when I drive frequently, I just recite mantras because it just keeps my mind in kind of a nice state. But yes, remind me of your name again. Jackie Dumba? Yes.
If you doing the best you can, if you mispronounce,
Uh-huh. Yeah. So the question is, if you're doing the best you can, but you're mispronouncing the mantras, again, I wouldn't say there's any negative karma involved in it or anything negative. It's best, once more, to go as much as we can to the source. But even Mary and I were talking over the break about how Rinpoche pronounced these mantras back in 2009 different than what they're pronounced at later teachings. So even his own discernment of the pronunciation based on the way that the Sanskrit is written, or the Sanskrit came into the Tibetan or whatever, it changes over time. So I wouldn't get too much into this kind of needing it to be absolute, because there probably isn't even an absolute pronunciation of it. Even the simple mantra that we frequently recite in Tibetan Buddhism, a mantra of Chenrezig, of Buddha of compassion, Om Mani Padme Hung. Well, the Tibetans all say Padme Hung, but it's spelled Padme, and so you might hear people saying Om Padme Hung. Does it matter? I mean, it's the essence of that Buddha of compassion. If you're saying it with the faith as that being the embodiment of that compassion that you want to cultivate in yourself, then I don't think there's any problem. There's nothing negative that's happening by virtue of that. So yeah, it's perfectly fine. Again, do our best to recite it. And certainly if you receive an empowerment from a Lama, or even when Rinpoche was here as well, he did a few nights where he gave the transmission of the mantra as part of what's called a jenang, which is sort of a subsequent permission that they usually give. It's more of a blessing in essence. He'll recite the mantra, and you often even recite the mantra after him. It's best to try to recall as best you can how it was pronounced by the mantra who gave you the transmission of that. But even if you mess that up, don't worry. It's not a big deal. Again, in Tibetan, they do recite things very different than what they look like in the Sanskrit. The word Vajra, which it's okay when we do Vajrasattva mantra to go Om Vajrasattva Hung, but many Tibetans will say Benza instead of Vajra. And so you'll hear them going, and they go, what mantra are you doing? You know, and it's like, no, that's the same mantra. It's just a different pronunciation. So I don't get too hung up on pronunciation, but once more, just try to do the best that you can. So, all right. Let's go on then to look at what Rinpoche says in terms of the absorption. I'll move the microphone back over there. Hopefully the sound will be better for those online. This is going to be, again, a clip on the absorption of the mantra.
So, then after you finish the mantra, then you see the heart of the Tibetan direction. Absorbs Om. Om then Om dissolves. Om absorbs the moon disk. Then moon disk absorbs back to going back from start. Moon disk absorbs instead of immersed in the direction. That's what so that's indestructible. But whatever food you eat, impossible to take ourselves, to take away, to lose our usage. Impossible. So, in all this, my speech became perfect. That all the Buddha suffers all day. You see, blessing power. This entered in my tongue. Entered in my. You see. Didn't you see? For the benefits which I mentioned yesterday, so that you get all that, and then.
So again, what Rinpoche was saying is that you do have this absorption that occurs. Now, when I was teaching this once previously, I had this vision that well, this is just how I thought I had heard it, but I couldn't find where Rinpoche actually taught it this way, that each mantra kind of dissolves from its tail, the end of it, into the head, the Om, and then that Om into the next Om, and then that would dissolve from its tail into that Om, and then that Om goes into the next Om, and then so on, until you get into the center where all of it has dissolved into the Om. But I don't know that that's necessarily correct, and maybe you can be creative with this. Another way to visualize it is that the outer mantra, which would be the blue dependent related heart mantra, simply absorbs right into the next ring, and then that ring that's red, then that garland absorbs into the white, and the white absorbs into the Om. So I don't know that there's any specific instruction on how that happens. Rinpoche just says it absorbs. So you can be creative, I suppose, without it too much problem, because again, I don't think that really matters so much, as long as you're having that everything absorbing back into the Om. The Om is on the moon disk, it then absorbs into the moon disk. Then the moon disk arises in the form, they call it a white red Ah. What's white red? It's essentially pink. So it becomes a pink Ah. That pink Ah is kind of this nectar then that dissolves into your tongue, making your tongue of indestructible nature. They call it Vajra nature, meaning that your tongue's very powerful at that point. All that power that you've collected and brought into the mantras through your own reciting it and blessing and so on, it's all come in to that Om, that Ah syllable, and that Ah syllable melting down into your tongue makes your tongue of one nature with that. So it is said then that on the basis of that, the very first thing that he said is that you don't lose any of the power of your speech on the basis of the things that you eat. And in Rinpoche's commentary, he goes into all of this. Some of the substances that we avoid that are called black foods, that when we do precept days, these are said to be substances that do have a negative impact on the energies in the body. Things like onion and garlic can diminish your speech to some degree. I think onion is like 4 days. Let me see. It stops the power of your speech from being taken away or degenerated by eating black foods. Eating garlic takes away the power of speech for 7 days, onion for 5 days. There's a particular type of radish. I don't know, maybe some of you know what it is. It's not the little red radishes we have. Daikon. That takes away your power of your speech for 9 days. Rinpoche says, there are different types of radish, but I think this is a particular radish that is large, round, and very strong. It makes the breath smell, produces a lot of gas, and pollutes the whole body. So does that sound like what that is? Yeah. Eating nettles. Nettles aren't really a black food, but they're said to be, Milarepa survived on eating nettles, but he says eating nettles causes the power of your speech to be lost for half a year. When nettles are cooked very well, they are delicious, but eating them has this shortcoming. And then, of course, we avoid meat. Meat is one of the big things in terms of black foods. Egg isn't mentioned here for some reason. I'm not sure why. But in particular, he singles out tongue, the tongue of animals. So like sheep tongue or pig tongue or something. I don't know if any of you in the room eat such things, but because you're eating the tongue of that animal, it's really quite negative. He says it has the power of taking away the power of your speech for your entire life. I don't know, again, I mean, these things do get into stuff that I can't speak to, but this is one way of assuring that any of these foods that we do happen to partake of, we're not going to lose the power of our speech. So that was one of the benefits that he speaks to. He's going to go into, I think, a little bit more about the benefits, and then they're encapsulated in that one little paragraph that we have in the practice. But let me go ahead. Any questions on that? Go ahead and continue with Rinpoche.
Then after that, you see,大概这个我这些包括怎么说是？
That was the best.
这第一是，怎么也是看看，怎么这个是看个的，也是，the umbrella, this basis of the senses, the tongue. 这些包括怎么说没这气是，也没这气的是， power of the, I guess, I won't say courage, but
This is the dedication prayer that's on page 18 that he's going.
I mean, one meaning would be courage, but I think by the power of the, I say, going to the bliss ones, Buddha says, they were just about the power, certainly, power, yes. And that, Sigi Sigi Tuteni, sometimes do shows. By the power of this, magnificence of word, my word, you see, made subdue the sentient beings. So you see, when you give teaching, when you talk, so that it helps. It is able to tame others. Sentient beings delusion, you see. Delusion, see. There's such mind about other things. And how to see. And then whatever my words expresses, may all the meanings be accomplished. So whatever, yeah. Like teaching Dharma or even other times, explaining, asking something others to do, see, so then I will accomplish all that. Not only during the teaching, but it's just also in other times in daily life, you see, when you talk to others, so they will say, accomplished. So. Nagarjuna explained that, he said Nagarjuna's hard practice there. So after you have done any body, speech, mind, any activities, any virtuous activities, not just any activities, but the virtuous activities of the body, speech, mind, whatever you did, see, and you recite, if you recite, you see, so recitation of the mantra, recitation of the mantras, or you see, after you have done the virtues of the body's mind, then you recite this, you see, the vowel consonants in the heart of the pen rising, you see. If you recite this, then the mantra, what you have recited, then get complete. Whatever, for whatever purpose you are reciting, you see, then it becomes very powerful. Increasing sicknesses become permanent, or in this life, and this merit, or whatever it's to increase, and so controlling, and then the realization, to achieve realization, the outer conditions to your practice Dharma, or you to benefit them, as well as the control of the sentient beings, so that you can bring them to it. So that those evil ones, so you don't, that they listen to you, so that they stop engaging in the heavy karma and things like that, and you investment. So those get completion, happiness,
So again, Rinpoche was just giving some explanation of the dedication prayer. Essentially, there are three components to that dedication prayer. The first part, the first two lines, making your tongue very powerful. And of course, that's one of the benefits that's mentioned in that little box up above, or not box, but the little paragraph right above the dedication prayer. The power of your speech becomes perfect. Rinpoche says the first benefit of blessing the speech is that it makes the power of your speech perfect. Due to this, when you teach Dharma, everyone listens to you and practices Dharma. When you do counseling, everyone pays attention and follows your advice. When you give a lecture, even a political speech, all the people pay attention and listen to you. So maybe we should send this to our favorite political candidate. When you give advice to someone, that person does what you say. When you speak to an important person, they listen to you and help you. In short, when your speech has power, other people listen to you, pay attention to you, keep your words in their hearts, and do what you say. If, on the other hand, your speech doesn't have power, when you give advice to people or when you ask them for help, they won't listen to you and won't do what you say. You know, he gives a little story about himself. I won't go into that one, but it says, therefore, you should bless your speech in the morning, not only for your recitation of mantras to have power, but even for your ordinary speech to have power. Whether it is to do your job, to request someone for help, or to explain something to someone, your speech needs power. If your speech doesn't have power, nothing will work. So this is the essential part of that dedication part of the prayer, and what we're saying in terms of that first benefit. Of course, it goes on then in the benefits to say the second one is whatever you recite is multiplied 10 million times. So if your Lama tells you to do 10 million of the mantra, you just recite it once. No, I'm just kidding. That's not true. But no, it does have this powerful effect. It increases the potential of what we're saying that's virtuous. As he was saying, the Rinpoche was saying, the things that we do that are virtuous, it increases the merit from that greatly. The power of your speech, as I said earlier, is not taken away by eating the wrong foods. I already talked about that. Rinpoche goes on to say, because black foods destroy the power of your mind and body, in addition to the power of your speech, it is best to avoid eating them. However, it is different for a great yogi of secret mantra who has complete control over their mind and the winds that are the vehicle of the mind. So they can eat, black foods and not be harmed in that way. But nonetheless, this is something to, if we do this recitation and bless our speech, we don't have to worry about the impact of that as much. And then continuing the fourth benefit, gossiping even becomes the recitation of mantra. Anything you say, even gossip, becomes the recitation of mantra. So again, how that works is just that, again, you blessed your speech. I mean, you shouldn't engage in too much non-virtue. I don't think that that's wise to, I'm just going to do all sorts of non-virtuous things with my speech, even though I blessed it. It kind of goes against the whole thing that we're trying to accomplish. But even things that we might say in passing to people have greater power to them. The other two parts of that dedication prayer continue with that theme. By the magnificence and power of my words, may all sentient beings be subdued. So the ability for us to subdue others with the power of our speech, to give them, advice and teachings that will help them to tame their own minds by virtue of what we have offered. And the meanings of whatever words we say be accomplished. I sometimes, when I recite this, I add instantly at the end. Whenever it says like kind of accomplished when, accomplished 80,000 years from now. I just have that thought of instantly, right now. I think it's really powerful to do that.
That was in the 2016 version.
Oh, maybe that's where I got it from even. So again, these have changed over time, even this practice. I think we're at a point where Rinpoche is not going to be doing much modification to this practice, at least so far. We don't think so, but are there any questions on this whole, because this ends that blessing of the speech practice. Again, so you have the refuge verse at the beginning. We didn't go through that much because it's, again, refuge and bodhicitta. It's the encapsulation of those two thoughts that we've seen repeatedly. Arising in the form of the deity, then doing the visualization on the basis of that, of the mantra garland, and then the mantra garland getting all the blessings of those holy beings, bringing it back, reciting the mantra with the three visualizations, absorbing the mantra, and then doing the dedication prayer. So it's really a very simple practice in some ways, but obviously the visualizations can be quite complicated. So shall we go on, unless there are any other questions? Yes. Oh, right. So the question was about the deity that you visualize yourself as dissolving. Of course, if you're practicing highest yoga tantra, I think there's no problem with trying to keep that awareness of yourself in the form of the deity. in fact, in most tantric practices, they don't really have a dissolution of your own self-visualization at the end. They don't have that so much because the idea is we want to try to maintain, they call it divine pride. It's a pride of being an enlightened being as best as we can in our daily life. Sometimes it'll change form. Like in some of these highest yoga tantra ones, you've got all these hands going on, like in Kala Chakra, I don't know how many it is, 26 or something. And you can have all these different, hands and legs and stuff. They simplify the visualization at the end. So you just have your 2 hands, 2 arms, and your 2 feet, rather than having all of those additional appendages. So there is sometimes that idea, but usually you don't get out of that kind of seeing yourself in that form as best as you can. Obviously, it's hard to maintain that awareness throughout our day. So we end up having to do another self-generation when we do our practice again. But have you heard anything contrary to that or otherwise? But
in the German tradition,
uh-huh.
they do dissolve
that self-appearance. Well, that would be maybe like a front generation. Yeah. 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 Okay. Because again, in those of you who are doing highest yoga tantra, even Kriya tantra, there's usually a self-generation, which is when you see yourself in the form of that Buddha, but you also are doing what's called a front generation. There's nothing wrong with, and usually they do have some level of the front generation coming to the crown of your head and dissolving into you. But I think in all the practices I've seen, you stay in the form of that Buddha in some capacity at the end of the practice. You don't dissolve that appearance because we're trying to maintain that appearance as best as we can. But thanks for sharing that. I wasn't aware that maybe there would be those differences. But okay, any other comments? Wow, it's like 11:50. I feel like we've done a lot today already. Maybe we just stop there. What we'll do at the beginning of next week then, we'll go through the daily mantras. These are good to know to kind of also do in conjunction with this practice, and the mantras for specific occasions that follow on page 22. There's not a lot to do there. There's a few videos I want to show, and I want you to hear Rinpoche pronouncing them where I can. He doesn't pronounce all of these because some of these were added after 2009, and so we don't have that opportunity to hear him pronouncing those as part of those teachings. But if you already know some of these, by all means, you should be, doing them every day if you can. They're really useful mantras to once more increase merit. The whole concept once more being that if we are able to create additional merit, additional positive potential, we're going to get enlightened even more quickly to benefit others. So it all goes back to our bodhicitta motivation. These practices are rooted in bodhicitta. They're rooted in our desire to become enlightened for the sake of others. And at the level of Tantra, the particular motivation, I mentioned this previously when we read the one verse. Well, let's even go back and look at that. It's on page 9. On page 9, in that, right in the middle there, it says, having trained my mind in the common path in that way, I will not be upset, even if I have to experience the sufferings of samsara for a long time. So once we get to, this is prior to going into Tantra, we might say to ourselves, well, I'm in it for the long haul, right? I'm going to do this as long as it takes. We talked about that previously too, right? I've got that long-term view of I will endure whatever needs to happen in order to get enlightened, in order to help other sentient beings. However, please bless me to look at sentient beings with extraordinary, unbearable compassion and to enter the quick path of the Vajrayana teachings. You need that level of motivation to enter into Tantra, where you get to the place where you say, I can't bear the thought that sentient beings are suffering because I'm not enlightened, because I can't help them then to the degree that they need help. I can help them to some degree, in doing what I can, but I'm so limited. If I become a Buddha, I'm going to be much more capable. Therefore, because I find it unbearable that they suffer, I want to become enlightened even more quickly. It's the same motivation behind these mantras and blessing this speech, where you say, I need to become enlightened even more quickly, because every day that I'm unenlightened is another day that sentient beings have to suffer. Okay, that's the concept behind all that. All right, if there are no more questions, comments, anything from the online folks in the chat box or anything? No, Nancy? Okay. Let's go ahead and do the dedication prayers for today. So again, on page 246. And by the way, those of you who aren't familiar with our dedication list, it's right by the suggested donation box there. on the left-hand side. If you want to add any names to the list, particularly we've got some pujas coming up in that. Our lovely assistant. So, and again, we have three categories. Those beings or parts of the world, whatever, that are experiencing obstacles that you're moved to put on the list. Those beings are experiencing illness, and those who are dying or who have died. And if you could put the death date, it's useful for us just to know 49 days is said to be the ideal time to create the merit to help them in their passage from this life to their next life. So it's helpful to have that date. Page 246, thinking about all those beings who we ourselves are holding in our hearts right now, as well as all sentient beings, let's dedicate the merit from today using these words from Master Shantideva. May all beings everywhere, plagued by sufferings of body and mind, obtain an ocean of happiness and joy by virtue of my merits. May no living creature suffer, commit evil, or ever fall ill. May no one be afraid or belittled with a mind weighed down by depression. May the blind see forms and the deaf hear sounds. May those whose bodies are worn with toil be restored on finding repose. May the naked find clothing, the hungry find food. May the thirsty find water and delicious drinks. May the poor find wealth, those weak with sorrow find joy. May the forlorn find hope, constant happiness and prosperity. May there be timely rains and bountiful harvests. May all medicines be effective and wholesome prayers bear fruit. May all who are sick and ill quickly be freed from their ailments. Whatever diseases there are in the world, may they never occur again. May the frightened cease to be afraid, and those bound be freed. May the powerless find power, and may people think of benefiting each other. For as long as space remains, for as long as sentient beings remain, until then may I too remain to dispel the miseries of the world. So then turn back one page and there'll be the paper clipped prayer for His Holiness on page 245. We'll recite that first, and then the prayer for Lama Zopa, that's on 244. Before we recite these, we can think about all of our own teachers that we have His Holiness and Lama Zopa, many of us, as our spiritual guides, but also we can think about others who are playing that role for us, and others who are playing that role for others, regardless of their spiritual tradition. You know, if they are helping others to find peace and happiness through practicing good morality and so on, then we pray for them to live long in this world, to have good health, and for us and others to always have perfect guides. The wish-granting, wish-fulfilling jewel, source of every single benefit and happiness in this world, to the incomparably kind Tenzin Gyatso I beseech, may all your holy wishes be spontaneously fulfilled. You who uphold the subduer's moral way, who serve as the bountiful bearer of all, sustaining, preserving, and spreading Manjunath's victorious doctrine, who masterfully accomplish magnificent prayers honoring the three jewels, Savior of myself and others, your disciples, please, please live on. Okay, thank you all very much. So for today,